Hello and welcome back to a new season 3 of Secrets of Social Impact Communicators. I'm your host, Nate Burt. So happy to have you here. My guest today is Jan Barlow, and I'm really excited for you to get to know her. Jan is founder of Better Job Fit. She works with key communities that need help with things such as getting engaged in new careers, transitioning from one profession, such as the military, back into civilian life. She's worked with foster care community and many others. And I think what you're going to find in hearing from Jan is just the importance of investing in your individual well-being as a social impact leader, growing yourself so that you can then help others achieve their goals for the public good. And I think you're going to really get a lot of value and be inspired by the enthusiasm, the energy, the positivity that Jan brings. Just a few housekeeping notes as we prepare to dive into today's episode. I would love to hear from you on ideas for guests, topics you'd love to hear addressed on this show, etc. As we move into this new season, please send me an email at nate@silvermaplestrategies.com. Again, nate@silvermaplestrategies.com. Would love your ideas. Also, be sure to rate and review the show on your favorite podcatcher and check out my newest book, 7 Secrets of Highly Effective Social Impact Communicators. You can find that wherever books are sold or check out my website for more information. Without further ado, let's dive into today's episode with Jan Barlow. Welcome back to Secrets of Social Impact Communicators. I'm your host, Nate Burt, and today I am delighted to have with me Jan Barlow, who's the founder of Better Job Fit. Jan, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Nate. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Well, I wonder if you could start off by giving my audience just a sense of yourself, sort of your personal background, your career trajectory, and what led you to found Better Job Fit.
Thank you. It seems like it's been forever, but it really started in 2007. I was at the height of my career working for a global pharmaceutical company and was hired from our biggest competitor. I was working in my strengths. I created my own job. Literally, I could sell a $500,000 laser. I had the clinical training to train the docs and the staff on how to use the laser, right, to perform the surgery. And then had a marketing background to where I could teach them how to sell that elective procedure to patients, right? Because it was an out-of-pocket procedure. They're not sick. The patients aren't sick, right? So I loved it. It's like having a startup. Every new client was a startup business because we had to integrate pathology versus retail, those two different business models. So it was fun. So, go sell it and 120 days up and running, making money, right? And I just went around the country and did some international work. That's what I did. I traveled 12 to 20 days a month, but I was living and working in my strength, right? In my calling. And that is such a high when you are so in alignment with your gifts. It's just so fun. You lose track of time and everything. So I was excited to work with a new company. And I was very clear about what my strengths were. Hey, this is what I did with the other company. This is why you're hiring me, right? Yes. Because at the time, they were trying to merge and acquire 2 other companies to create this new division. So that's a cluster pluck in and of itself. The merger and acquisition process of one company into another is already really chaotic.
Sure.
But to have 2 of them is really just not smart. But they needed to make sales, right? They needed to have that continuous sales process going. So the manager hired me just for that. And 2 months later, they moved that manager. I got a new one and changed my job description and everything. And Nate, my hair started to fall out. My palms started to peel. I mean, I was asked to merge Excel spreadsheets into a computer. Like, I didn't even have the programs. So I was set up for failure, right? And common when you change managers, if they didn't hire you, they don't want to keep you, right? So I just thought I had to try harder. And what happened was trying to be somebody I wasn't, trying to work outside of my strengths, really caused that physical manifestation of, again, sickness, right? I mean, I was at risk for a heart attack and stroke. So pretty much just everything bottomed out, lost everything. And coming back, I just said, what am I called to do? Well, I want to make sure that nobody else experiences what I did. And so the first, really, when it came to foster care and veterans, my friends, either they were CEOs or started a care organization. I said, well, I'm going to take all that science and experience what I did for the ophthalmologist and the laser company for job matching, and said, fine, I'll just use it for the most vulnerable population. So what better way to use what I learned and how I was really made my name? But Nate, it was really, I had to do for others. That's the only way how I got better to come out of that, is to serve others. So to get out of my pit, if you will, I just had to say, okay, put myself in service to others so I can start raising my own vibration and my, to come out of the pit.
Yeah, well, I love that, Jan. First of all, I'm sorry that you had to go through that. And it sounds like it really perhaps provided you with some clarity and direction. And like you said, gave you an opening to really think about, how can I serve others and use those talents in a way that made you feel aligned with the mission that you were working toward. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, you talk in your organization about raising the conscious awareness of the workforce. And I'm curious what you mean by that and why it's so important for social impact leaders to prioritize that in their organizations.
Thank you so much for asking that question, because I think what it comes down to is when you're working from that higher level of awareness, you're operating from a we versus me mindset and perspective. So the more that you can raise your own level of awareness, conscious awareness about yourself, about others, now you're moving to a higher level of we. And now you're focused on, how do I use my strengths and talents and gifts for the greater good? So you're thinking at a higher level, not just in your little bubble. When you start to feel and know more about yourself and about others, and you're pouring into you and knowing more of you, it's just natural expansion. That's just how human nature works, right? When you start to feel confident in what your path is, or your lane, so to speak, in your gifts, you just automatically rise to the top and feel more confident. So now you want to share those gifts with others. How can I lift up others or use those gifts to the greater good? So it moves from a me to a we. It's just natural human expansion, right?
Yeah, I love that. And I think, your point is well taken. And yet so often we as leaders don't invest in ourselves, our own growth. We underinvest in our team simply because, as we were talking before we started recording, you're jumping from one fire to the next, or the outcomes that we're working toward in social impact, whether it's like you are with veterans or foster care or climate change, pick a topic. They can be so large and daunting and overwhelming that I feel like the complexity or the weight of those topics limits that ability to move from me to we. So I'm curious, with some of the client types or the organizations that you serve, can you maybe give some specific examples of how you are serving those types of organizations and maybe what you're learning about this transition from me to we as part of that?
Yes. When we started with the veterans and the foster care populations, they come from a population or an environment where it's so structured and it has so many rules, not only how they're veterans, right? The military, that has so many rules around it and in it, guidelines they have, and foster care, they're governed. That whole process of foster care is governed by laws, right? And restrictions. And they aren't able to make their own decisions a lot at the time, right? Because of that structure. Well, after both of those populations exit out of that environment or that bubble, it goes into a boundless arena of, especially for job searching, there are no rules, there are no processes, there's no SOPs when it comes to that, right? And so there's really no guidelines. And the guidelines that are given, the vague guidelines that are given, it's so structureless that it's difficult for people to transition, especially veterans in foster care, because they're like, okay, my life was so coordinated and through A through Z, I had some say, but I still have these guidelines I have to stay in. And now we go out to the private sector and there are no processes or procedures there. So literally their brains, it puts them in food, water, shelter mode. So what we do with job matching is we take that guesswork out. We keep them out of harm's way and say, hey, guess what? Here's a menu of choices that we're going to only pull the 85% matches and above. So we're going to keep you out of harm's way and let's just focus on these choices. They're a custom match to you, right?
I love that. And I think it's got to be so clarifying for your clients, especially those who are veterans, to take that very unstructured, chaotic job searching environment and make it approachable and actionable. And again, I think a lot of the work we do in social impact is not just delivering those positive benefits to society in the form of, reduced greenhouse gases or higher job placements, but it's also the confidence that you're giving those individual men and women who are searching for work, or the confidence that they can reintegrate back into civilian life and be excited at showing up to work every day in this new environment. So I love that work that you're doing. Does that resonate with you?
Oh, that so does. And Nate, I think what's really not spoken of or discussed much is the psychological impact when you are in job transition. It doesn't matter who you are, right? But when you are in that food, water, shelter mode, you can have a house, you can have everything's fine. But mentally, if you're in that fear mode, food, water, shelter, like, oh my God, I don't have a job. And you start to get into that psychological spiral. That's really what I wanted to help alleviate, right? To help reduce, because that really, especially with veterans and foster care, it's a high rate of suicide, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think one of the biggest stories, and I'll make it short, but the biggest story was seeing a veteran. He had been out for 5 years. This was a mental health group that I was supporting. And the gentleman never talked a lot during these times, these sessions. He finally opened up and said, what really was difficult is I led men and women to safety and saved so many lives through my leadership. I get out of the military and I don't even know how to get my own prescription filled.
Wow.
And he hadn't spoken, and he'd been coming to this group for a year. And he finally spoke and he was able to share that story. So to me, that's huge. To a lot of people who are like, hey, how hard is that? Like, you can go get a prescription filled, but you don't understand that simple things that we take for granted or assume that everybody knows is not true. So taking those vulnerable populations and being able to say, hey, here are your choices. You have more than what you even anticipated or could think, that we can translate your military experience into these jobs, right? It's customizing to the person. So to me, that's life affirming.
I love that. That's a really powerful story, Jan. Thank you for sharing that. On the foster care side, I'm curious if there's an experience that stands out that really highlights how you're serving that community and the kinds of transformation like you were describing on the veteran side.
What I love about the foster care, that was the first major impact. Veterans was good, but really we had a young man, he was turning 18 and he was into college, right? But the college career counselor said, oh, you can work at McDonald's or you can go. And I'm like, don't assume that that's all that person can do. And that's the sad part is, and it's not anybody's, it's a human nature thing. Mm-hmm. We assume, we perceive people. We have our own stories that we think that perceptions of what people are able to do. And that's what the beauty of our tools are. It goes beyond the limited beliefs of what somebody thinks you can do. Right. Or what we can do for ourselves. So this young man, I said, well, fine. The career counselor said that you could work at McDonald's. Well, guess what? We did his job match survey and he was a 98% match to a manager in hospitality. So I said, fine, let's go to Subway because they have a program for assistant manager. And that's exactly what we did. We went to because I was on the board of the foster care organization, went to the Subway, to 2 or 3 different Subway franchises and talked to the owner and said, hey, he's a 98% match to hospitality, matches this type of job and this type of program. Do you need help?
Right.
I said, oh my God, yeah, that was a no-brainer. So being able to go to the companies and say, look, I already have somebody who's a match to your job. This is a no-brainer. Here's the map of the person. You don't have to guess. I'm giving you right here everything that this person is a match to and how you can best use this person's gifts and talents. So to me, being able to take that young man and put him in a position of strength and already align him to a management course when he was 18, I pretty much jumped 4 years ahead, right?
Yeah.
He got a jump on experience 4 years before any other student, right? Because the career counselor doesn't know how to guide them. Right.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that story, Jan. And again, just helping down to the individual level, really understanding their strengths, their talents, and then helping match them up with that great opportunity and helping them just accelerate their progress, their own personal growth, I think is so exciting. You've developed several frameworks within your organization for helping leaders and teams that are focused on social impact work. One of them is the 10 stages of corporate growth. And I wonder if you could maybe talk us through that a little bit. Let's step back from the specific awesome examples of transformation and talk about, okay, how do I show up in my organization to enable those kinds of transformations for the clients or the communities that I serve?
I think it's best for any leader, CEO, VP, or whatever from the C-suite, and even department heads to really know what stage of growth, because you can have a company that's in let's say they're in the prime level or stability level of growth. And then they get a new department, like who I worked for, right? They expanded their department or started a new department. That department is now in the infancy stage. So out of the stages of growth has nothing to do with the age of the company, how much money it had. It has nothing to do with that. You know how people say, oh, I want to work for a small, medium, or large company. That has nothing to do with it. So when we talk about the 10 stages, of course, courtship is just an idea of a business, of what, you could do. But it's really infancy, go-go, adolescence, prime, stability, aristocracy, recrimination, and bureaucracy, and death. So you can see these, can look what's beautiful about each of these stages and just understanding the big picture of these stages, because you read them and it will tell you the pros and cons of each stage of what the challenges are. But as a leader, it's going to allow you to say, hey, this is what we got to do with our people. This is what direction we got to take the business. We got to focus on the sales, but making sure that people fit those jobs. Because in certain stages like go-go and adolescence, you're creating really, the jobs are really built around people instead of matching the people to the job.
Right.
You're just saying, okay, wear 10 hats and 3 might fit.
Right. There's work to get done. Let's do it.
Right. Yeah. And I get that. But from a conscious perspective, why would you put people in harm's way like that? Why? There's no reason to.
Right. Jan, that's super helpful. So let me go back to something that I think we talked about before we hit record, which was you started the call saying, we have free will, right? We have a choice to wake up and be really positive. Are the stages of growth, is this sort of deterministic, you are bound to go through all of these stages? Or is there a way to break free of any of the aspects of some of these stages maybe that don't serve us, that don't allow us to sort of lean into that social impact mission? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. What's interesting, you can go buy a company that is in any of these stages, right? Like I said, you can have a established company, meaning they're in the prime stage, but if they acquire another company, if they open up a new division, that little silo is going to be the infancy, or they're going to be going through a different state, right? So at some point you could say, okay, I built my business all the way to prime. I just want to sell it. Okay, that's great. So now what do you do next? So now, when I work with business owners that have sold their business, they're like, okay, what do I do now? Okay, let's talk about what role, first of all, when we do our job matching, let's talk about what do you want your lifestyle to be? And let's create that role or your next around that lifestyle and your strengths. Like I had a client that she worked for Texas Instruments. She was a global IT director planning for her retirement in 1 year. She wanted to buy a bead business. Like she liked beadwork. She wanted to spend like $1 million or $2 million on a brick and mortar bead store. Well, guess what? She wasn't a good match to that. After we did the job matches to everything that she would have to be responsible for in a brick and mortar, she only matched one job, and that would be the bookkeeper, right? So like we made sure that, hey, let's create a business around you, not you trying to fit into a business. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it sounds like the stages of corporate growth really help you understand where the organization is at in its evolution, how you personally fit or don't align with that, and then trying to find streamline things both for the organization and for the leaders who are functioning within it. Is that a fair analysis?
Oh my gosh, Nate, thank you for summing all that up.
Yeah,
that's perfect.
My pleasure. I'm glad. I just want to make sure I'm tracking.
Genius.
Not at all, but I'm glad we're tracking. That's great.
Yeah.
Let's go down from the organization layer, one rung, to the people who are leading it. You talk about behavior diversity. How does this framework align with the work that you do at Better Job Fit, and how does this help us as leaders?
It's traditionally, I got to tell you, the impetus, what really inspired this. When I worked for the global pharmaceutical company, I was the one in the middle. So because I touched both like R&D, clinical affairs, clinical training, and sales, right? Business development. So I touched all those departments. So I was like in the middle. So during an FDA clinical approval process, all those departments have to work together to fill out what's called a red folder through the FDA clinical process, right? When you're trying to get your medical device or pharmaceutical product approved. So I was kind of seeing the dysfunction on both ends, all within the one building that had clinical affairs, R&D, and everything. And then I was just like saying, hey, we got a problem here. And people didn't know what they didn't know. Leaders were saying, go take them out bowling, take them out for lunch. That's not working. Like that doesn't work. So literally fast forward, Nate, they initially acquired the laser company it was $1 billion. It was the largest medical device acquisition at the time. Fast forward 6 years, going into the 7th year, they lost their FDA clinical approval. So not only the $1 billion that they paid, but also the $1 billion or more that was invested in the next 6 or 7 years. So when I understood, I was like, oh my God, like that was a behavior issue. That had nothing to do with people's color or anything. It was truly a behavior. And so that's why I started with behavior diversity. So we base our decisions or perceptions of others based on behavior, because that's a knee-jerk reaction. It's the differences that we can't see that really influences our perception of others, right? So at a deeper level, what we try to do is it's about deference over difference, respect over talking about how different we are, right?
Sure.
Right? And that's really what behavior diversity is about. It's shifting when you can shift people from acceptance of self. So this is the process, acceptance of self. It's all about the individual. It's about accepting themselves. Then naturally they accept others, right? So this why traditional DEI training and ESG training hasn't worked is because it's about shame and blame. The training is all based on shame and blame. And so psychologically, this is psychology 101. When we sense or perceive shame and blame, if you say, okay, well, people are feeling victim because you're doing X, Y, and Z, we will automatically, our hearing physically shuts down. We can understand the concept, but behavior change doesn't happen. because our hearing physically, it's just stopping, right? So we're getting the message, we understand the words, the concept, but it's not seeping into our being to change behavior. Through behavior diversity, we're able to, number one, when a person accepts who they are from a behavior scale, if you're an 8, so think of this, if you're a 2 on assertiveness and you work with a boss who's an 8, guess what? You could perceive that boss as being a bully. And it truly is just the resistance gap of behavior on the scale.
Sure.
So you see how now all of a sudden that story can play out really bad and go south real quick.
Right.
Right? When if we already knew that in the beginning, that you could perceive that person as you're going to sense, if we knew right at this moment, we said, hey, Nate, John is an 8 on assertiveness. You're a 2. Got to be honest. There are going to be times that you're going to feel that energy resistance gap and you're going to feel bullied. You might attach that word to it. And it just may very well be that energy difference of the 8 and the 2. You see how now it's not about you're doing something to me. It just, we're talking about this is what could go south here. This is where we got to understand where the differences are, where that resistance gap is. Let's just identify it now and let's talk about how we're going to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
Now there's no shame and blame. It's more solution oriented.
Yeah, that's great, Jan. Thank you for clarifying that for me. And to build on that, you talk a lot about the importance of shame-free learning environment, about upping your human game. Maybe give us some quick play-by-play on what those terms mean to you and how that fits into the kind of workplace you're describing, which is greater self-awareness and also greater awareness of others' behaviors and some of those gaps that may cause conflict.
Thank you for asking that question, because a lot of people, they just want a solution, right? They don't understand that you got to facilitate.
Sure.
It's really, truly in the term facilitate is to make easier. And that means you're involved in it, right?
Yeah.
You're not promoting something. There's totally different. That word means something different. So when we talk about really creating that shame and blame-free learning environment, it's creating and facilitating a positive learning experience of different over difference. So the standard is respect, not focused on our differences or favoring one over the other, right? So the most foundational change that leaders can implement is if somebody has negative feedback to provide, right? If they say, well, we shouldn't be doing this, or we can't do this because it's not going to work, or so-and-so starts blaming somebody. You say, hey, own it. I hear you. Now, what's the solution? So you're creating a psychological disruptor, and that's the standard that you make for everybody across the board. If you have something negative to say about someone or something, what's the solution? Come up with a solution. And you got to break that habit, because a lot of people are just in that automatic complain mode and hot mouthing somebody else and saying, hey, so-and-so is not doing their job. Okay, what's the solution? So now you're making the person be part of the solution. There's that accountability piece, right?
Sure.
It's not about you got to do something about it. Well, guess what? If you see a problem or you have a contrasting opinion or feedback, then you obviously have a solution in mind. What is it?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Really, people are just so quick to point out problems. You got to be part of the solution. If you're not, then don't say anything. No, that's it. That's what it comes down to. If you're not bringing positive change or coming up with a solution to better the situation, then you're just being part of the problem.
Sure. No, absolutely. And I love that idea of a solutions-focused environment that allows us to navigate conflict rather than dwelling on it and, finding a productive way forward. I think that's so important. Jan, you work so much at reimagining work and life for the clients that you serve. What's a question about that specific topic, right? Reimagining how we show up at work, reimagining how our workplaces function, that people aren't asking often enough, but they should be.
I love this question that you have because it does come back to self-awareness and that self-accountability. The question that we should be asking ourselves is, in my work or life, what is the one thing that I'm doing that isn't serving me well anymore? So you see now, you're asking yourself, what's not serving me? So we tend to think that outside circumstances are dictating us. But the tail doesn't wag the dog. Right. I'd like to say that, right? I get to ask myself, what's not serving me well? So when you ask yourself that, that's an empowerment question. It's not projecting out like, oh, I can't do this because X, Y, and Z. If we start to ask ourselves, what in my work or life, what is the one thing that I'm doing that isn't serving me well? That's what happened in 2020 with the Great Resignation. People sat on their couches, they had nothing else to do, and they asked, this is not working for me.
Right.
But they had all the external distractions had to stop for them to sit down and ask, wow, I'm not digging this anymore. Like, this doesn't serve me well anymore. So then everybody went to either start a business, quit. So it's because they asked themselves, they looked at everything around them and said, this is not serving me well. I'm not liking it.
Yeah, right. I love that question, Jan. And I think I love it for several reasons, but it's important, I think, to acknowledge where we've been in our life and career, right? So that question acknowledges like this thing may have served me well at one point, but it no longer does, right? And so I'm looking for an opportunity to figure out what is the change I need to be more well, more whole, et cetera. So I think that's really, really valuable. The next question I had was stories, which you've shared several really powerful stories, I think are really important for us as social impact communicators to not lose sight of why we're doing what we do, right? So I'm curious if there's a story you've encountered in any avenue, right? It could be a fiction novel, it could be a movie, it could be something from your personal or career, but something that's really moved you or made a difference in your life over the past year, some story that's really resonated with you.
I have to share with you, in June, out of Inspired Action, we created a social impact workshop in Houston, Harris County, the second largest county in the U.S. And we were called because I kept on hearing all these people say, oh, lack of resources, crying about how we don't have enough money, blah, blah, blah. So I got together with one of our Force Multiplier for Good members that lives there. And I said, okay, let's put I want to put an event together. So we brought together venture capitalists, community foundations, nonprofits, for-profits together. And it was within the first hour and a half, we had what was called you do a SWOT analysis, just a real short, your strength, weaknesses. So we had everybody do that for themselves, broke them up into small groups. So one of each from each category of industry. And by that 20-minute exercise, at the end of that, we had one financial institution that had a $5 million grant community project fund, and they were sitting with a nonprofit organization that was their how they served the community, and literally funded a community project. So to me, to be able to say, wow, that inspired thought of take the risk, we've never done that before, we invested in it, took the risk. Again, it was money that we hadn't budgeted. We just said, you know what? Okay, I'm called to do this. I know it's going to work. And to see the relationships that really were created from that experience afterwards that are going to continue on because we did something different, because we put people that weren't in the same industries. So we shook it up, right? We created that disruptor. To be able to say, wow, that was amazing, right? That to me, that really, if I died tomorrow, I could say, you know what? I at least did what I was called to do. And we were the spark that created that connection and funded a community project that would have never been funded unless that situation, people, places, and things. So to me, I think for the last year, that would be my greatest moment of inspiration.
I love that story, Jan. What's powerful about that story is several things. I mean, one is that you had the belief this is going to work, right? You could have easily said, oh, we're not going to do the event. It's too risky. We got other stuff going on. But you made the choice. You invested in the effort to organize. And then there's this spark of opportunity between funder and nonprofit that I think is so powerful. And again, I think there are a lot of leaders out there, especially maybe at small to mid-sized nonprofits in particular, who are really struggling just for financial sustainability. And so your story sort of, I think, is inspiring that there are lots of different avenues to doing the work you love and making the difference that you envision. And it starts with that belief that it's possible, right? And tapping into that great network that you've built. I love that. Jan, when people look back on your life and contributions, what do you want them to say?
I hope I'm remembered for the added value that I brought into their lives, right? That I helped them see the greatness within themselves and within others and help them think differently. I mean, that's really, in a nutshell, I think I would say that I did good,
Yeah, I love that. I think that's fantastic. And again, I think your work focuses so much on transformation, right, of organizations, of the individual, and it starts with how we think. And again, before we hit record, you were already helping me sort of reframe my thinking from there are so many things that are challenging or out of our control in this world. And yet it starts with that attitude that we can be positive. That's a choice. That's something we are not just automatons. We're not robots, right? We get to decide. I think that's so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Jan, I would love to talk for another hour. Because we are out of time, I'm curious for any last thoughts. And I'd also like to make sure you're able to tell folks who are listening where they can go to learn more about you and about Better Job Fit.
Thank you, Nate. I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to share time with you and to really share time with your audience. I really want people to reach out to me directly. jbarlow@betterjobfit.org. And I know you'll put that in the show notes.
You bet.
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn, Jan Barlow. But I got to be honest, I want the one-on-one connection. I want to schedule time with people. The website's not going to tell. I mean, I want to know more about you and your audience, right? To me, it's the shared experience. How best can we support one another in what we're called to do? And to me, that would be the best.
Fantastic. Jan, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise today, and the very best to you and your team.
Thank you so much, Nate. Talk soon.
All right. Thanks, Jan. Bye-bye. Well, that's all the time we have today. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jan Barlow of Better Job Fit as much as I did. I think one of the things that really stood out to me was this phrase, deference over difference, really getting to know those we work with on our teams, external partners that we may collaborate with on social impact projects. It is so important, at least in my personal experience and when I work with clients, to really dive deeper into emotional intelligence, into collaboration, into personal and organizational values, and working to bring those into harmony, right? We're not always going to agree. This is not a perfect world. There's going to be conflict. But getting clear and recognizing and honoring our differences and then coming together for progress, for momentum, has never been more important, especially when our world is so divided. So I think as social impact leaders, we have so much of a responsibility, an exciting responsibility, to create more unity, more harmony, less friction, more momentum in achieving the goals that we have. That's all the time we have for today. Special thanks to Lee Williams for fantastic production on this episode and all of the others that you've heard to date. And again, a reminder to go check out 7 Secrets of Highly Effective Social Impact Communicators. Draw me a line and review the show. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode. Remember, social impact work is soul work. Lead like you live.